This is a tutorial that I'm going to make for my Python library called RP. RP stands for Ryan Python. Yeah, I know it's a little bit cliche, but hey, I got a PyPy name for 2 letters. So if you want to install it, you can do pip3 install RP. I already have it installed, so nothing special is going to happen. But yeah. To run it, you should be able to just type RP. It should create an alias for that. And once you have it up and running, you can see the terminal. However, if that doesn't work for whatever reason, you can always type python3-mrp. That should also always work. What this is a terminal. That's better than the default Python terminal. So when I type python3, this is the default Python terminal. And when I type RP, I get my terminal. Now, this terminal is based off a library called PTPython, which has a terminal similar to this. This one has many more features. It's more customizable. So, for example, if you don't like this prompt, you can type set style, and it will give you a whole bunch of different choices to choose from. So, I personally am going to use 3. That's the one that I like the most right now. Actually, you know what? That's like the default Python one. Let's use number 2. Yes. Alright, there we go. So, this terminal features a few things that I'm going to go over in this video. I mean, it features a lot of different functions, but I'm just going to go over a few right now. One is autocompletion. When I start typing, I immediately get a whole bunch of autocompletion choices. 2, it starts out with a gigantic default library, which you may have just seen. So, for example, if I want to, let's say I want to load an image from the internet. I can type load image of this URL, and it will load that image for you. So this is my default library that goes with this terminal. You don't have to use it if you don't want it, but I find that it makes life easier and more convenient. You could give this a URL or a file on your computer, and when I type display image of answer, because this is answer, it will display that image. So the point of that is just that part of RP is that it has a large library, and the other half of RP is that there's a terminal that you're using. I use RP sometimes for its library when I'm doing things in, let's say, Google Colab, but I use the terminal when I'm at home or using SSH. Another thing to say would be that this, unlike most terminal applications, can use the mouse. I just pressed F1 to turn mouse mode on, and now I'm going to click this menu button, and I can actually interact with it with my mouse. If I want, I can write some text. Oh, by the way, I can have multi-line editing with syntax highlighting. That's a feature of this terminal, kind of like in Vim, except this is just a Python REPL. So it's not it has features of text editors, but it's more than just a text editor because you can write and run your code at the same time. So I can use my mouse to select areas of this code and even just hit the backspace and it will delete it as if it was a normal text editor. This has a lot more features than normal text editors do, though. So, for example, I'm going to show you another feature of RP, which I call microcompletions. Unlike autocompletion, which is a large menu when you type some letters and you see this large menu of completions that I can hit tab over and over to go through, I consider microcompletions a term that I use for my own projects. It's not a universal term, this is a term that I made, is something more. When you're using a text editor, such as, let's say, Sublime, right, and I type the forward parentheses, it automatically inserts this parenthesis right here. Right? That's not a autocompletion, so what is that? I feel like that's kind of an autocompletion, but smaller, so I call it a microcompletion. Microcompletions are basically things that make life easier. When I type one quote, it inserts the other. When I type define, I'm going to set this to Python mode, so when I type define f, right, and I hit enter, it automatically puts that tab there. I didn't ask for that tab, it just put it there. I didn't have to make that myself. I consider that to be a micro-completion, as opposed to an auto-completion, which just completes, like, namespaces. Right, so, that being said, my editor has a billion different micro-completions. If you want to see all of them, there's documentation for this program. You can type help, and you will see a bunch of different things that you can go through. But this help page is not very comprehensive. It's smaller, so if you want more, you can type, as you see over here, under documentation, HH help. So it means more help. I'm going to type H help, and I'm going to get a gigantic ton of documentation here. This entire list here, by the way, all of this, these are all different micro-completions. I'll go over that in a minute. But the second point that I want to go over is on the bottom here. This lists a bunch of different commands, and it tells you what some of them do over here. This documentation isn't complete yet. I'm still working on that. And this is stuff that only I need to know, so don't worry about that. Right, so, now that I've showed you how to find the documentation, that should be useful. Okay, going on to micro-completions a little bit. I'm going to type def, like when you're making a function in Python, right? And I'm going to hit the space bar, and it inserts a colon for me. That's nice, right? I'm going to type F space X space Y space Z. Enter. R space X. Enter. Enter. F space 1 space 2 space 3. Enter. Like a calculator, I can even do multiplication. So I could do, like, on a calculator, I can do something like 8 plus 6 equals. Okay, great. But what about times 14? Alright, nobody memorized what 8 times 14 is. What is 8 times 14? 112. I guess it's doing PEMDAS. But the point that I'm making is that I could do something like 1, 2, 3. And then I could do, like, enter and then plus 6. Sorry, 1, 2, 3 equals plus 6 equals. In the same way, I can do times 8 times 2 divided by 4. Notice that, like in MATLAB, it continually says answer equals, answer equals, answer equals. So if I do print answer, it will print 4. If I do answer plus answer, it will do 8. If I then repeat that command, it will do that. In fact, I'm pressing the up arrow key to go to the previous command, but I could actually press Control E, or even just hold that down, and it will just do that for me. I don't have to type up enter over and over again if I want to repeat the same command. I can just press Control E, which is a nice small feature of this terminal. Back to some more micro-completions. So, nice thing is when I create functions, D space F space X space Y, enter, R space X plus Y. That's one example. When I want to call functions, I can do F space F space F space 1 space 2 space 3 space 4, enter. I never had to reach my fingers over to type the parentheses, neither the opening ones or the closed ones, and I also didn't have to type the commas. The spacebar is the biggest key on your keyboard, so it makes sense to make as much use of it as possible. It makes life easier. Here's my philosophy behind micro-completions. The total space of all different characters that I could type is huge. It's much larger than the total space of all valid Python syntaxes. So it should make sense that I should be able to capitalize on that by not having to type as much, because the space of all total things that I can type that are syntactically correct is smaller. So that's where micro-completions come in. Whenever there's something that you would type that would make a syntax error, it treats it as a command. Not all the time, but very often whenever I can think of a good way to do it. I'll just show a few more microcompletions right now. So if I do, for example, if space x space a y, wait, why did a just make and? Control Z to undo, Control Z, Control Z. If I press A, there's nothing else that could have possibly started with the letter A that wouldn't have been a syntax error. I can't put a variable name here. That doesn't make any sense. There's no operator in between these. So whatever comes after this has to be an operator. Whether it's plus or minus, but if it starts with a letter, there's only one possibility, and that's AND. And the only thing that's possible after AND is a space. So when I do type if x space a, we'll insert if x and with a space after it. So I do, for example, if space x space ab, enter. And by the way, it will insert pass if I hit enter again, because that just makes sense. If you don't like these microcompletions, you can always go into Vim mode by typing F4. And on the bottom, you'll see that RP modified Emacs will turn into Vim. And you can use this terminal as if you were using Vim, and all the microcompletions disappear. But honestly, I love microcompletions, which is why I made them, and they're very unique to this terminal. This is really the only place I've ever seen them, which is why I had to give them a name. I hope you like them. Okay, next things. So this terminal can edit large amounts of code at once. So unlike the default Python terminal, I can edit in multiple lines. I can change this line, then change that line. And usually, I mean, you take that for granted if you use something like Sublime, but the thing is that the default Python terminal doesn't support that. If I do def F, it doesn't even have syntax highlighting. If I do F, enter, it doesn't even insert a tab. But it's okay. Print 1, enter, tab, print 2, enter, print 3, enter. Oh crap, I made a syntax error. Well, not a syntax error, I made an error. This shouldn't have two N's in it. I made a mistake. Well, I can't go back and change that. If I hit the up arrow key, it will just go through my previous commands and create gibberish. I hit enter. Oh well, I'm gonna have to start over again. Def F. You get the idea. Unlike in this terminal where I could just go up and down and edit wherever I want to. There are different color themes, by the way. If I hit F2, and I want a different syntax highlighting theme, there's a whole bunch of different themes that I made for you. Also, there's different user interface themes. Different color themes for everything. You can customize it however you want. And once you get a theme that you like, type pt save. This stands for pseudo-terminal, which is the name of the terminal. RP is the name of the library. This terminal's name is called pseudo-terminal. And you type pt save. And next time I reboot this terminal, oh my god, I just set it to a random syntax highlighting theme and then I saved it. Oops. Well, when I exit RP and I go back again, you'll see that that syntax highlighting theme is still called Fruity, which is what I set it to before I type pt save. Like if I set this to like native, right? So here's what this native syntax highlighting theme looks like. Right, so like if I change that to like Prezio Dark or something, you'll see that it changes. Right now I set it to native, but remember how earlier it was on Fruity. This is what it was when I started it, and now it's at native. I'm going to exit this terminal. I did not type pt save. Go back. Now it says Fruity. So if you want to save your settings for your color themes, type pt save. If you want to change your prompt, type set style. I believe these are mentioned inside the help documentation. Alright, on to some basics about how the terminal itself works when you're typing in Python code. So I'm going to make some random code here, and it's going to give me an error. And note this message only appears one time. I mean, it actually says that. So I'm going to type another random gibberish thing, and you'll see that instead of getting in regular Python terminal, I get multi-line garbage each time I make or any kind of error, and it quickly clogs up the terminal. So like if I have like define f, and f will call g, I'm going to define g, g will call h, I'm going to call define h, h will have some error. I call f. Every single time I call f, I'm going to get this gigantic syntax error. Sometimes it can be a lot larger than that. So if I do like from rp import load image. Oh, sorry, this is yeah. If I type from rp import load image. I'm going to type some random file path that does not exist. And I get a gigantic syntax error. Gigantic stack trace. And while it's great to know what's happening in this error, look how hard it is to go back and find my code. I have to scroll all the way up somewhere else just to find some one character modification that I might have made. Not here. By default, this only displays one line, and not only that, it's a different color. But if you want more information, you can still get it. I'm not trying to be restrictive here. If you type more, it will show you more information. So if I type load image of, let's say not that puppy, let's say instead of JPEG, we say JPIGGLE. I mean, that's definitely not a real kind of file type, so this should make an error, right? Okay, good. Yeah, I made an error. This is not enough to tell me what went wrong necessarily. I mean, it kind of does. It says it can't identify the image file. But let's say that it's more complicated hypothetically, and I did not know what caused this error. I could type more. Okay, this is what regular Python would have given me. This is a regular stack trace. It shows me the lines of code where it failed and the different functions, and what those functions' names were. That's great and all, but that's not really good. That's just what default Python gives you. There's another thing. Just like help gave you more help, more gives you more and more. So if I type that, it will give me a very detailed stack trace. And every single frame here will not only tell me multiple lines of code for context of where it failed, and not only that, it will give me the function definition and the file and all that, like regular Python does, but it tells me the value of each variable when it crashed. I know what's going on. This is so helpful. It has saved me so many hours of work. Because, like, when you have an error, you don't have to insert print statements everywhere to figure out what went wrong. It just tells you all right away. It's like a debugger, but simpler. But if you need the power of a debugger, you could do dmore. Yeah, dmore actually brings you into a post-mortem debugger, so that if, like, a debugger after your code has died. So you can actually explore your code after it's dead, and you can see all the variables in all the different stacks. I just hit enter over here, and it will go to a different stack. And I can explore my code as much as I want, and if I want to make some experiments, for example, what is this value in this stack where it crashed that I can't normally access without using PyDebugger or something else? Much less a visual kind of interface like this. I can type location. I could type, what is this function is valid URL. Okay, that's a function. But what if invalid URL gave the wrong thing, right? What if location, as it turns out, was a URL? I mean, it sure looks like one. As it turns out, it's not a valid URL because, like, I can't connect to it. But is valid URL of Like, I suspect that this is breaking. I suspect that, like, this is a valid URL, and that it should try to load image from URL. Actually, no, I was wrong. This does say it's a valid URL. What if I say some random URL that's wrong? Is valid URL of this? Okay, actually, no, that's not why. It didn't. This function didn't try to connect to the internet. Huh, didn't know that. So if I try load image from URL of location, is that where the error happened? Yeah, that's where the error happened. Okay, let's go back to the stack. You get it. You know how to use a debugger. That's all I wanted to show you. There's also the more interactive debugger, which can actually run through your code. You could type /pu, and it will insert a library called PUDB, and you can debug your code. For example, if I want to do load image of this /pu, and I do enter, it will bring me through this, and I can hit like S to step through the code. S will step through, and now I see where I am. Like, step, next, 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 next. I can see the variables on those right are going to be changing over time. Next. Oh, well, I guess I already exited the function because it was done. There's also if you're using Windows, PUDB doesn't work, so you can do /DE, and that will bring out a different debugger. I actually have two debuggers built into this. They're using different libraries. This one is more native. This one will run everywhere, and this one is much more close to PDB. If you ever use Python's debugger, this is just a visual form of it. It has all the same exact commands that PDB does. The other one is more of a typical debugger, which I use personally more often. But when I'm on Windows, I use this one. Yes, my terminal works on Windows too. Okay, so that was a quick overview of how the debugger exists and how you have different stack traces. Next, I'm going to go over the profiler. So when I typed load image, I noticed that regardless of how long this took to load, it's not instant. Where's the bottleneck? Why is this so slow? I can do prof on, which will turn the profiler on. And then I run my code again. And it tells me that load image took 0.243 seconds to run, and it hid some information because this is not code that I wrote. And then there's another suspiciously long thing to take called receive into. This doesn't really tell me that much. I wish I knew more. I wish I had more information. So I can type prof deep. This uses a library, by the way, called PyInstrument, which I integrated into my terminal to make it easier to use. It also tells me, for example, that the actual time that my CPU spent was small, while as the total duration of this entire function was 0.244 seconds. What does that mean? It means it's waiting for the network a lot. Not much is going. For example, if I do NumPy multiplication, CPU time shoots up way up because it's not even using the GPU, it's just waiting. It's not just waiting, it's doing calculations actively versus just waiting for the network connection, which means I could probably do a lot more multi-threading here. Anyway, prof deep will make the profiler give more information. So if I type load image of this thing again, it will show me a lot more information. It shows me what function called who, and it orders them in terms of which one took the most time to run. For example, it doesn't order it. URL open was not necessarily called before content was called. The only reason why this is first is because content took less time than send, so you'd want that to be on the top. So you see green ones are taking less time to run, don't have to worry about them as much. It tells you which function came from which file. It's really nice. I use this a lot whenever I find something that is slightly slow. I don't have to put a bunch of timer statements everywhere and manually figure out where the bottleneck is. It will just tell me right away. And I will probably make more tutorials for this in the future, but Right now, I'm just going to end this on uh, a nice option over here called Sand Creature. If I change this option, and this is something that I honestly think every terminal should have, like, my terminal has a bunch of things, like, heck, when I'm in full screen mode, it's even helpful because, like, it even has battery life down here. It has 87% for my battery, which for my computer is particularly relevant, which is why I put it there. It also says it's 5:30 a.m. I should definitely be asleep right now. That's also good to know, especially when you're full screen and your clock doesn't show on your computer. I don't know, maybe that's just a me problem. But I built that into the terminal, and maybe it will help you too. Oh yeah, I also forgot to mention there's the history function over here. If I press F3, I can actually go through and select different commands that I've written over time by hitting the spacebar, and choose different things that way, and enter that into my code. So notice I'm selecting completely different lines from different places. When I hit enter, I get all of this code, and well, there it all is. I could also type history, all in caps, and this is different because this only gives me the history of commands that made things work. So for example, if I type 3, enter, and then I do answer +7, and I could do like h equals, and then that will be a part to h equals answer. So now when I type h, it will print that. Because again, I'm lazy and I don't want to type h equals answer. Yeah, I'm that lazy. I know. But hey, it saves you some keystrokes, doesn't it? So yeah. Or just like h. Actually, yeah, I guess it didn't make h plus. Oh, I'll add that in later. I would want that to parse to h plus answer. So anyway, yeah. So if I go into history, one thing that I've heard from other people, even more recently, earlier today, is that a useful feature would be if you can take all this code that you run. For example, I can't just copy paste this into my terminal and expect it to all work again. I'd have to weed out this character over and over again, and I can't do that in a regular Python terminal either, especially when I get gigantic stack errors like this. I can't copy paste this to get usable code again. But when I do history, it will keep only the commands that didn't make errors. Furthermore, it parsed something like 6 into answer equals 6. So when I go to history, you'll see on the bottom now it says answer equals 6, instead of just having the command 6, which is what F3 does. F3 shows you those commands, including these commands like this, which you should not be copy-pasting into your code. The capital history command does that, though. What are some other cool things? So you've probably had some confusing code in the past. I know I said I was going to go to bed, but I changed my mind because there's some more things that I want to show you because it's cool. So, yeah. Hold on a second. Let me find some confusing looking code here that has a bunch of unnecessary parentheses that are nested way too deeply. I guess this is kind of confusing. I mean, there's this parentheses over here. I mean, it actually highlights the end of the parentheses for me when I put my cursor over them, so it's not that bad. But if I type here and I go to parenthesizer on, it will show me a nested version of those parentheses for me, so that if I have a lot of parentheses that are really confusing to read, actually I have a good example. I have a good example right here. I'm going to go into my repository, and I go into the Death of the Mind file. I will make another tutorial on another day for what Death of the Mind does. It's not a particularly useful file, but it is definitely very meme-worthy. I remember at one point it used Google Translate to tell me the old wisdom of it is important to, quote, worship both Jesus and Christ, end quote. I'm not sure whether to be proud or ashamed of my AI. Anyway, back to this. These parentheses are very confusing because they're so heavily nested, but when you use parentheses, Automator, it's simple. It will just show you a different... Outer parentheses are bigger. Inner parentheses are smaller. It makes you able to quickly glance and see what is contained inside of what, and I got this idea off of seeing LaTeX. If I go to Desmos, for example, and I have multiple parentheses here, you'll see that the outer ones are larger than the inner ones. And that makes them easier to read. So if I have like, I don't know, like square root of x minus x0 all squared plus like y minus y0 all squared. So like the distance between like 2 points, for example. But let's say I want to get all fancy and add like a logarithm to it for whatever reason, I don't know. And then I want to add exp because I'm lazy and I want to undo that. The outer ones are bigger, the inner ones are smaller. It's easier to read, just like this. Math equations can get complicated, and so can code. This helps you. That's what that's for. Alright, let's see, is there anything else that I can think off the top of my head before I decide not to go to bed again? This project for me is like 3 years old at this point. There are a lot of really cool features that I put into it. So I will definitely be making more tutorials later. For example, if I want to do like, there's a bunch of cool functions like playing chords. Yeah, okay, I should turn off the profiler. I did not expect that because I forgot about it. Prof off. I turned off the profiler. Shouldn't do that again. Okay, there we go. It's all fine. Another thing I guess would go over would be that I have, well, I mean, this is kind of simple, but I use it all the time because it's really nice. I'm just going to copy a big chunk of text over here, because why not? If I want to turn this into a string and use it in the terminal, it's annoying. Especially in regular Python. If I want to copy this as a string into Python, I'd have to add quotes around it. Right? But let's say I want to copy something like this, which might already have quotes in it, like these. Or heck, what if I want to do something really crazy and copy just regular source code and paste it as a string? Where like you see this code, it has both double quotes and single quotes. And just for good measure, let's add some triple quotes like this. I want to copy this as a string into Python, not as code. If I just paste it, it will be an error. But if I then try to add some quotes to the beginning, like a quote here and a quote there, I mean, that can't be right. I know there's quotes in the middle of it. So that's an error too. What I can do is string paste spaced, and it will turn whatever's in my clipboard for my operating system into a string, and that string is answer. So if I do print answer, it will print it because now that's a string. If I do answer times 2, it should duplicate it, right? It's a string now. That's nice. Or if I want to actually just paste code in, let's say I want to paste this function in. I've copied this function, and I want to paste this function in. I want to run that as a command. So I just type paste, and it will run that as a command, and it will actually show up in history because that didn't make an error. None of these things made errors. Alright, so the last thing that I'm going to show, if I don't think of anything more at the last minute, is this function over here, which I think that every terminal in the world should have, but not every terminal in the world does have. It's a very secret function which you, the viewer of this video, are now privileged. You have earned the right to see this. Change this feature one more time, and you get a big, glorious Doge in your terminal. Now, isn't that something you've never thought you needed before, and will probably never think you need again? The glory of this Doge will bless you with good luck, and I bid you a good night.